I sacrificed my 20s paying my parents' mortgage, believing we were a team. Then I found their will, my unemployed brother gets the house, and I get nothing because I'm capable. I didn't scream. I silently cut them off. Then came the text. The cursor blinked on the glowing screen, a rhythmic, taunting pulse in the otherwise dim study. Blink, blink, blink. I sat there, frozen, my hand hovering over the mouse as if touching it might detonate a bomb. In a way, I supposed it already had. The explosion just hadn't made a sound yet. It was happening entirely inside my chest, a silent implosion of air and blood and trust. My head was already pounding before I sat down. I had come over to my parents' house straight from a 10-hour shift at the logistics center, fighting off the tail end of a nasty sinus infection that had left me dizzy and drained for weeks. My eyes felt heavy, gritty with exhaustion, and my throat was raw. I shouldn't have been here. I should have been in my own bed, under a weighted blanket, sleeping off the fever that was creeping back up my neck. But Mom, Mary had called. Urgent, she said, panic in her voice. The computer was acting funny, and she needed to print a shipping label for a package she was returning. She couldn't wait. She never could. So, dutiful daughter that I was, I had popped 3 ibuprofen, grabbed a coffee I couldn't taste, and drove 45 minutes across town to fix a problem that turned out to be a disconnected printer cable. I had fixed it in 30 seconds. "While you're there, Emily," she had called out from the kitchen, the clatter of pans drowning out any genuine gratitude, "just clear out the desktop icons. It's so messy. Dad keeps saving things everywhere." That was how I found it. I was dragging old screenshots and accidental duplicates into the trash bin, trying to be helpful, trying to be the good girl I had been for 34 years. And there it was, not hidden in a folder, not password protected, just sitting there on the desktop, saved earlier that morning. Final Will and Testament Draft May, PDF. I shouldn't have opened it, I knew that. Privacy is a boundary, even with family. But the date on the file was today's date. And curiosity, coupled with that strange, sinking intuition that warns you of danger before you see it, forced my index finger to click. The PDF opened. I scrolled past the legalese, the standard boilerplate about sound mind and body. My eyes scanned for names. I was looking for reassurance, I think. I was looking for proof that the last decade of my life, the checks written, the vacations skipped, the overtime work to cover their unexpected expenses, meant something. I wasn't looking for a payday. I was looking for acknowledgement. I found my name on page 4. Article IV, Distribution of Real Property and Assets. The words swam before my feverish eyes, and I had to blink hard to clear them. I read it once, then twice, then a third time, mouthing the words silently in the dusty air of the study that smelled of my father's stale pipe tobacco. To our son, Kyle Gary Davidson, we hereby bequeath the entirety of our estate, including the primary residence at 42 Oak Lane, all vehicles, and the contents of our savings and investment accounts. We do this to ensure his future security and stability. I stopped breathing, the entirety. My eyes darted down, desperate to find the error. Surely there was a mistake. To our daughter, Emily Davidson, we leave our love and best wishes. As Emily is professionally successful, financially independent, and capable, we feel she does not require financial assistance from the estate. We are proud of her resilience. I felt the bile rise in my throat, hot and acidic. They were disinheriting me, not because I was estranged, not because I was cruel, but because I was successful, because I was capable. Resilience, I whispered, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. They were punishing me for the very trait that had kept a roof over their heads for the last 10 years. I looked around the room. I looked at the ergonomic chair I was sitting in. I bought that for Dad's back 3 Christmases ago. I looked at the new energy-efficient windows framing the view of the garden. I paid the deposit and the installments for those because Mom complained about the draft. I looked at the computer screen itself, a gift for their anniversary last year. Everything in this house, including the equity in the walls, was sustained by my money, my labor, my resilience. And they were giving it all to Kyle. Kyle, who was 30 years old, currently asleep in the finished basement at 4:00 p.m. on a Tuesday, and who hadn't held a job for longer than 3 months since he graduated high school. The shock was a physical blow. It hit me harder than the diagnosis I'd had a few years back when the stress ulcers started. This was different. This wasn't just unfairness, it was a fundamental rewriting of reality. I looked at me and saw a resource to be mined. They looked at Kyle and saw a treasure to be protected. "Emily, is that printer working yet?" Mom's voice floated down the hallway, shrill and demanding. "I need to get this package out before 5. I closed the document. I didn't save it. I didn't delete it. I just closed the window, leaving the desktop exactly as it was. My hands were trembling so badly I had to grip the edge of the mahogany desk to steady myself. The wood dug into my palms, grounding me. "Emily." "It's working," I called back. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, hollow, detached, like a ghost speaking through a medium. I stood up. My knees felt weak, buckling slightly under my own weight. I grabbed my purse. I didn't go to the kitchen to say goodbye. I didn't wait for her to come check the printer. I walked straight to the front door, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I stepped out into the cool autumn air, the door clicking shut behind me. It was a soft sound, barely a whisper, but to me, it sounded like a gavel coming down. The betrayal was worse than the theft. It was worse than the money. It was the realization that to the people I loved most, I was nothing more than an insurance policy they didn't think they needed to pay premiums on. The drive home was a blur of gray asphalt and red taillights. I don't remember turning the key in the ignition. I don't remember merging onto the highway. I was operating on autopilot, my body performing the mechanical functions of driving while my mind remained trapped in that dusty study, staring at the words entirety of our estate. I had to pull over 3 miles from my apartment. I guided my sedan into the cracked parking lot of a closed-down gas station, put the car in park, and just gripped the steering wheel. I gasped for air, forcing oxygen into my lungs, trying to stave off the panic attack that was clawing at my throat. They left it all to Kyle. It wasn't just the house, it was the principal. For a decade, I had been the safety net. When Dad hurt his back and couldn't go back to work, even though the doctors cleared him for light duty, I stepped in. I was 24, fresh out of college, drowning in student loans, but I stepped in. I took over the utility bills first, then the insurance. Then, when the bank threatened foreclosure in 2018, I started paying the mortgage directly. I remembered the conversation so clearly. Mom had sat at the kitchen table, weeping into a tissue, clutching my hand. "We just need a little help, Emmy, just until Gary gets his disability sorted. You're the smart one, you're the strong one. We'd be on the street without you." The disability never got sorted because Dad never really pursued it. He just retired, early, and I just kept paying. I paid because I thought we were a family unit. I thought we were in it together. I thought I was investing in our collective future, keeping the family home safe so that eventually, when they passed, Kyle and I would have something. But there was no Kyle and I, there was just Kyle. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat, vibrating against the leather. The sound made me jump, my heart leaping into my throat. I looked at the screen, Mom calling. I stared at the picture I had set for her contact, a selfie of us from a brunch 2 years ago. I had paid for that brunch. I paid for the mimosa she was holding. I paid for the new blouse she was wearing in the photo. I let it ring. It went to voicemail. 2 seconds later, it buzzed again. A text. "Mom, you left without saying goodbye? Rude. The printer works, but now the internet is slow. Did you change something?" I stared at the words, rude. She didn't ask how I was feeling, even though she knew I had a fever. She didn't thank me for driving 45 minutes out of my way after work. She just had a complaint. Then a second text popped up. Mom, also, don't forget the transfer for the car insurance is due on Friday. Dad wants to take the SUV in for a detail, so add an extra $100 if you can. Thanks, sweetie. Something inside me snapped. It wasn't a loud snap. It was the quiet, brittle sound of a tether breaking after years of tension. Add an extra $100, like I was a vending machine. Press a button, get cash. I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. My skin was pale, my eyes rimmed with red, my hair messy from a day of solving crises at the warehouse. I looked exhausted. I looked used. Capable, I said aloud to the empty car. I am capable. A cold clarity began to wash over me, cooling the heat of the fever. They thought I was capable. Fine, I would be capable. They thought Kyle needed security. Let Kyle provide it. But they had forgotten one crucial thing. They had forgotten who actually logged into the banking portal. They had forgotten whose name was on the recurring transfer setup. They had forgotten that capability works both ways. I picked up the phone, ID. Didn't reply to the text. Instead, I opened my banking app. Face ID logged me in instantly. The bright blue numbers of my balance stared back at me. I tapped on the Scheduled Transfers tab. There it was. Mom and Dad mortgage support, $1,800, monthly. Mom and Dad utilities, $450, monthly. Mom and Dad emergency fund, $300, monthly. It was staggering to look at it all at once. Over $2,500 a month, $30,000 a year. I tapped the first one, edit, delete recurring transfer, confirm. I did it for the utilities. I did it for the emergency fund. Then I went to my external payees list. The electric company account linked to their address, remove. The cable company, remove. My thumb hovered over the final confirmation. A wave of guilt, programmed into me since childhood, tried to stop me. They're your parents, the voice whispered. They're old. They can't handle this. Then I flashed back to the PDF. We leave our love and best wishes. Love doesn't pay the mortgage, Mom. I pressed delete. The app displayed a cheerful green checkmark. Success, payee removed. I put the phone down. The silence in the car felt different now. It wasn't the silence of shock anymore. It was the silence of a predator waiting in the tall grass. They wouldn't know, not today, not tomorrow. The mortgage wasn't due for another 3 weeks. The electricity was on auto pay until the payment bounced. I put the car in drive and pulled back onto the road. The nausea was gone. In its place was a cold, hard knot of determination. I wasn't going to tell them. I wasn't going to warn them. If I wasn't in the will, I wasn't in the budget. To understand why this hurt so much, you have to understand the history. You have to understand that I wasn't just a daughter. I was the retirement plan they never bothered to save for. It started 10 years ago. Dad, Gary, was a shift supervisor at a manufacturing plant. He was 54 then. He tweaked his back moving a pallet. Not a break, not a slipped disc, just a strain. But he came home, sat in his recliner, and decided he was done. I've worked my whole life, he'd told me, nursing a beer while I tried to do my college homework at the kitchen table. It's time I got some rest. Mom, Mary, was a receptionist at a dental office. She couldn't handle the stress of the new billing software they installed, so she quit 2 months after Dad retired. I was 24. I had just landed my first junior operations role. I was making $45,000 a year, which felt like a fortune to me at the time, but in reality was barely enough to survive in the city. They didn't ask me for money directly at first. It was subtle. Oh, Emmy, we're a little short on the light bill this month. The pension check is late. Emmy, the water heater burst. Can you put it on your credit card? We'll pay you back. They never paid me back. And then the loans became contributions, and contributions became expectations. By the time I was 28 and promoted to manager, I was paying their mortgage. I drove a 10-year-old Honda Civic so they could lease a new Ford Explorer. I lived in a one-bedroom apartment with a noisy radiator, so they could live in a four-bedroom colonial with a manicured lawn. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself it was duty. But mostly, I did it because of Kyle. Kyle, the golden child. Kyle is 4 years younger than me. He was the baby, the boy, and in Gary and Mary's eyes, he could do no wrong. While I was working through college on scholarships and part-time jobs, Kyle was finding himself. He tried college for a semester, dropped out because the professors were idiots. He tried trade school, quit because it was too hard on his hands. He tried starting a DJ business, a t-shirt brand, a crypto mining operation. Guess who funded those ventures? Mom and Dad. Guess whose money they used? Mine. I arrived at my apartment complex around 6:00 p.m. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the parking lot. As I walked up the stairs to my unit, my phone buzzed again. It was a notification from Instagram. Kyle the entrepreneur just posted a photo. I stopped on the landing and opened it. The photo was of Kyle. He was standing in front of my parents' house, the house I paid for. He was wearing a brand new leather jacket, sunglasses, and holding a bottle of expensive scotch. The caption read, "Grind never stops, big moves coming soon, hustle # empire inheritance." Inheritance? He knew. The realization hit me like a slap to the face. He knew about the will. I zoomed in on the photo. In the background, visible through the living room window, I could see Mom. She was laughing, holding a glass of wine. Dad was sitting in his chair, smiling at whatever Kyle was saying. They were celebrating. They were drinking wine I probably paid for, in a house I definitely paid for, celebrating the fact that they were going to give it all to the son who had never contributed a dime. Kyle wasn't just a passive beneficiary. He was an active participant. He was 30 years old, living rent-free in the basement, playing video games until noon, and convincing them that he was a budding genius who just needed capital. He was a leech, a charismatic, good-looking leech with Dad's nose and Mom's manipulative streak. I remembered last Christmas. I had given them a check for $5,000 to cover their property taxes. They had opened the card, glanced at the check, and Dad had said, "Thanks, Em." Then Kyle handed them a poorly wrapped box containing a digital picture frame he'd bought on clearance. Mom had cried, "Oh, Kyle, it's beautiful, you're so thoughtful." I had stood there, sipping my eggnog, feeling invisible. But I wasn't invisible anymore. I was the enemy. Or rather, I was the host, and they were the parasites who had just decided the host was no longer necessary for the long term, only for the daily feeding. I unlocked my apartment door and stepped inside. It was quiet, it was clean, it was mine. I tossed my keys on the counter and walked to the fridge. I grabbed a bottle of water and downed it in one go. They wanted a villain. They wanted to punish the capable one. I thought about Mom's text. The mortgage is due. It wasn't due yet, but it would be. And for the first time in 10 years, the auto draft wouldn't be there to catch it. I pictured Mary's face when she opened the letter from the bank. I pictured Gary trying to explain to his golf buddies why his membership was revoked. I pictured Kyle realizing that the empire was built on a foundation of sand that I had just washed away. I wasn't just going to stop paying. I was going to watch them fall. My phone buzzed again, another text from Mom. "Mom, Emily, are you ignoring me? Dad needs to know if that transfer is coming tonight. The detail shop is booked for tomorrow morning." I stared at the screen. The audacity was breathtaking. I typed out a reply. My fingers flew across the glass, fueled by a decade of suppressed rage. "No transfer tonight, Mom. I'm feeling a bit under the weather. Maybe ask Kyle. He's the one with the big future, right?" I didn't hit send, not yet. That was too emotional, too revealing. If I tipped my hand now, they would guilt-trip me, scream at me, maybe even come over here and pound on my door. I needed them to feel the consequences before they heard the explanation. I backspaced. I typed a new message. Me, sorry, fell asleep. Don't worry about the car. I'll handle everything soon. It wasn't a lie, I would handle everything, just not the way they thought. I hit send. Then I turned off my phone. The silence that followed my decision was not empty. It was heavy, pregnant with the static of an approaching storm. For 3 weeks, I did not visit 42 Oak Lane. I did not answer the casual check-in texts from Mom, which were really just temperature checks to see if I was still functioning as their ATM. Did you see the weather report? Dad's back is acting up again. Kyle's birthday is coming up, we should do dinner. I let them pile up unread, archiving them into a hidden folder on my phone. Instead of playing the dutiful daughter, I became the operations manager. I treated my departure from the family unit not as an emotional breakup, but as a corporate restructuring. If they saw me as a resource, I would audit the books. I started with my own records. I pulled 10 years of bank statements. I downloaded every Venmo transaction, every Zelle transfer, every check image. I built a spreadsheet. It was a grim task, cataloging your own exploitation. 2016, roof repair, $8,200. $2,018, Dad's medical procedure, which turned out to be a hair transplant, $4,500. $2,020 2023, mortgage payments, $64,800. The final number at the bottom of the spreadsheet made my stomach turn. It was enough to buy a small house in cash. It was enough to travel the world 3 times over. It was a retirement fund. My retirement fund, siphoned off to fund their delusion of an upper-middle-class life. But I needed more than just my own records. If I was going to cut ties, I needed to know exactly what I was walking away from, and more importantly, what Kyle was walking into. I remembered the investment accounts mentioned in the will. Dad always bragged about his portfolio. I've got stocks, Emmy. I'm not stupid. That's for the legacy. I had power of attorney for Dad's medical decisions, which, due to a clerical error at their bank years ago that they never fixed, gave me view-only access to their primary checking account linked to his profile. I hadn't looked at it in years because I felt it was intrusive. Now I logged in. I expected to see a modest balance, maybe a few $1,000s. What I saw was a horror show of financial hemorrhage. The checking account was overdrawn by $400. The savings account had $12.50, but the real smoking gun was the transaction high. A story. Withdrawal, Casino Morongo, $400. Transfer to Kyle Davidson, $1,000. Transfer to Kyle Davidson, $500. Transfer to Kyle Davidson, $2,500. They weren't just giving him the house in the future, they were bleeding themselves dry for him now. Then I saw it, a recurring deduction that didn't look right. Servicer loan, $99,283, HELOC payment, $650. A home equity line of credit. My heart hammered against my ribs. A HELOC is a loan taken out against the equity of the house, the equity I had been building by paying the mortgage. I did some digging on the county clerk's public records website. It took me 10 minutes and $15 to download the deed and lien history for 42 Oak Lane. There it was. 18 months ago, Gary and Mary Davidson had taken out a $100,000 line of credit against the house. I stared at the screen, my coffee turning cold in my hand. $100,000. Where did it go? I cross-referenced the dates with the bank statements. 2 days after the HELOC funds hit their account, there was a wire transfer for $90,000 to KDAV Global Ventures LLC. Kyle. They had stripped the equity out of the house, my equity, effectively, and handed it to Kyle for one of his business ventures. I typed KDAV Global Ventures into the state business registry. It was registered to a P.O. box. The nature of business was listed as consulting. I sat back in my chair, the cold light of the monitor illuminating the dark room. The house was worthless. They hadn't just disinherited me, they had hollowed out the inheritance before Kyle even got it. They were giving him a shell, debt-laden and underwater, and they expected me to keep paying the monthly premiums on the Titanic while they rearranged the deck chairs for him. I wasn't just a safety net. I was the fool at the table who didn't know the game was rigged. But they had forgotten one thing. The HELOC was in their name. The mortgage was in their name. And the only leverage they had over me, the guilt, the hope of future fairness, the desire to protect the family home, was gone. I printed the documents, the bank statements, the HELOC lien, the wire transfer to Kyle. I put them in a crisp manila folder. I wasn't going to warn them. I was going to wait for the inevitable collision. It happened on a Tuesday evening, exactly 32 days after I stopped the payments. I was in my kitchen making a salad, listening to a podcast when my phone buzzed. Then it buzzed again. Then it rang. I wiped my hands on a towel and looked at the screen. Mom. I let it ring out. Then came the text that would end our relationship as it had existed for 3 decades. Mom, the mortgage is due. The bank sent a letter saying the payment failed. Why did you stop the auto pay? Fix it immediately. We are going to be late. No hello, no how are you, no is something wrong financially. Just a demand. Just the panic of a parasite realizing the host has detached. I picked up the phone, my thumb hovered over the keyboard. I could have typed a paragraph. I could have screamed. But I remembered the advice of a lawyer friend. Say less. Make them fill the silence. I typed, I know, I canceled it. 3 dots appeared instantly. They danced for a long time. Mom, what do you mean you canceled it? Are you crazy? This affects our credit. You promised to help us. I replied, I promised to help family. I didn't promise to fund an estate I'm not part of. The phone rang immediately. This time I answered. Emily, it was Dad. He sounded breathless, angry. What the hell is going on? Your mother is hyperventilating. You can't just... I'm coming over, I said, my voice eerily calm. We need to have a house meeting. Have Kyle there too. Kyle is busy with his. Have Kyle there, I cut him off. Or I block this number and you deal with the bank yourselves. I hung up. I grabbed the manila folder. I grabbed my purse. I drove to the house, but this time I didn't feel sick. I felt like an executioner walking to the scaffold, grim but necessary. When I walked into the living room, the atmosphere was suffocating. Mom was on the sofa, clutching a throw pillow to her chest, her face blotchy from crying. Dad was pacing by the fireplace, his face a mask of red-faced indignation. Kyle was slumped in the armchair, looking bored, scrolling on his phone. Finally, Kyle muttered without looking up. Can we hurry this up? I have a conference call at 8. Put the phone away, Kyle, I said. I didn't raise my voice, but the sharpness of it made him look up. Don't speak to your brother like that, Mom snapped. Emily, explain yourself. The bank says we owe 2 months plus late fees. That's nearly $4,000. Why would you do this to us? I walked to the coffee table and placed the manila folder down. I didn't sit. I stood over them. I went to fix your computer last month, Mom. Do you remember? She blinked, confused. What? Yes. What does that have to do? Why? The mortgage. I found the file, I said. The draft of your will. The silence that fell over the room was absolute. It sucked the air right out of the space. Mom's mouth opened, then closed. Dad stopped pacing and looked at the floor. Kyle, surprisingly, let out a short, scoffing laugh. So, that's what this is about. You're throwing a tantrum because you didn't get your participation trophy. Kyle, shut up, Dad muttered, but it lacked conviction. No, let him speak, I said, turning to look at my brother. Is that what you think this is? A tantrum? It's greedy, Mom whispered, finding her voice. She looked at me with genuine disappointment, which was almost impressive in its hypocrisy. I raised you better than this, Emily. Counting pennies before we're even dead. It's morbid, and it's selfish. Selfish, I repeated. I have paid over $60,000 toward this house in the last 3 years alone. I have paid for your groceries, your electricity, your cars. And in return, you wrote me out of the family because I am capable and Kyle needs security. It was just a draft, Dad blustered, waving a hand dismissively. We haven't signed anything. You're reacting to a piece of paper that means nothing. So you didn't mean it, I asked. You don't intend to leave the house to Kyle. Dad hesitated. That hesitation was the truth. He needs the help, Emily, Mom pleaded, shifting tactics from anger to martyrdom. Look at you. You have a career. You have a 401k. Kyle is a dreamer. He just needs a leg up. When we're gone, we need to know he has a roof over his head. You can buy your own house. He can't. So because I worked hard, I get punished, I said. And because he refuses to work, he gets rewarded. And I get the privilege of paying for the reward. We are a family, Mom cried out. We help each other. No, I said, reaching into the folder. I help you. You help Kyle. That's the dynamic, and I'm done. You can't be done, Kyle said, sitting up straighter. You can't just stop paying. The market is tough right now. If we lose the house, where do I go? Where do they go? That sounds like a question for the beneficiary, I said coldly. You're being vindictive, Dad spat. Over a draft, we can change the will, okay? If it means that much to you, we'll split it 50-50. Will that make you turn the payments back on? He thought it was a negotiation. He thought he could buy me back with a promise he would likely break the moment I left the room. It's not about the will anymore, I said. I opened the folder and pulled out the second document, the deed recording. It's about the $100,000 you stole from the equity. If the room was quiet before, now it was dead. Dad's face drained of color. He looked like he had been punched in the gut. Mom let out a small, strangled gasp and looked terrified, not at me, but at Dad. Kyle, however, didn't look shocked. He looked annoyed. Stole is a strong word, Kyle said, crossing his arms. It was an investment. They invested in my company. Your company, I said, pulling out the third sheet, the printout from the business registry. KDAV Global Ventures, the company that consists of a P.O. box and, according to my research, zero revenue. You don't understand startups, Kyle shouted, finally losing his cool. He stood up, his face flushing red. It takes capital to scale. I'm building an e-commerce empire. I'm going to pay them back 10 times over. With what? I asked, my voice cutting through his volume. I checked the wire transfer, Kyle. $90,000 went into your business account. And then where did it go? Did you buy inventory? Did you hire staff? I pulled out the final piece of paper. This was the one I had to fight for. I had called in a favor with a friend who worked in commercial banking to run a soft risk assessment on Kyle's LLC. You bought a Tesla, I said. You took a trip to Cholum, and you lost $15,000 on sports betting apps. That's a lie, Kyle screamed. That's illegal, you can't look at that. You posted the Tesla on Instagram, you idiot, I said, and the Cholum pictures are still up. I turned to my parents. Did you know he spent your home equity, the money you borrowed against the house I was paying for, on a car and a vacation? Mom looked at Kyle. Her eyes were wide, pleading. Kyle, you told us you bought, what was it? Inventory software. I needed the car for meetings, Kyle yelled, his voice cracking. Appearance matters, Mom. You don't understand business. Emily is just jealous because she's a corporate drone and I'm an entrepreneur. He blew it, I said to Dad. The money is gone. The house is underwater. You owe the bank more than this place is worth because of that HELOC, and now you can't pay the mortgage. Dad sank into the sofa. He put his head in his hands. He looked old. Suddenly, incredibly old. But the denial kicked in. The defense mechanism that had enabled Kyle for 30 years. He's young, Dad mumbled into his hands. He made mistakes. We all make mistakes. Mistakes? I asked, incredulous. He defrauded you. He's your brother, Mom shrieked, standing up. She walked over to Kyle and put a hand on his arm, shielding him from me. Stop attacking him. He's trying. At least he has dreams. You're just cold. You're cold and calculating. Checking our bank accounts? Spying on your brother? Who does that? Someone who is tired of being the bankroll for a con artist, I said. Get out, Mom hissed. If you aren't going to help, get out of my house. It's barely your house anymore, Mom, I said. The bank owns most of it. And frankly, with the mortgage 2 months behind, they're going to want it back soon. We will figure it out, Dad yelled, standing up to join Mom's side. We don't need your money. We have resources. You have $12 in your savings account, I said. I checked that too. Get out, Dad screamed, pointing a trembling finger at the door. I looked at them, the three of them, united in their delusion. Mom and Dad, standing in front of the son who had robbed them, protecting him from the daughter who had saved them. It was a perfect tableau of dysfunction, and finally I felt the last cord snap. The guilt was gone. Okay, I said. I closed the folder. I'm leaving, but I'm taking this with me. I tapped the folder. And just so you know, since my name was on the co-signer agreement for the furnace replacement 3 years ago, I'll be contacting the HVAC company tomorrow to settle my portion and remove my name. You'll be on the hook for the balance immediately. You wouldn't, Mom whispered. Watch me, I said. I turned and walked to the door. Emily, Kyle called out, his voice mocking. Don't come crawling back when I make my first million and buy this whole block. I paused with my hand on the doorknob. I looked back at him. He looked smug, but his eyes were terrified. He knew the money tap was dry. He knew the reality of the bills was about to hit him like a freight train. Goodbye, Kyle, I said. Good luck with the mortgage. It's due on the 1st. I walked out into the cool night air. I got into my car. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I felt lighter than I had in 10 years. But the war wasn't over. They were cornered animals now, and cornered animals bite. I knew the texts would start coming. I knew the flying monkeys, the aunts, the uncles, the cousins would be deployed to guilt me. I needed to make sure that, when the inevitable public explosion happened, I controlled the narrative. I drove home, opened my laptop, and began drafting a new document. Not a spreadsheet this time, a timeline. Because I knew exactly where the climax of this drama would take place. Mom's 65th birthday party was next weekend. The whole extended family was invited. And knowing Mom, she would use that stage to paint me as the villain who abandoned her elderly parents. I had to be ready. The invitation for Mom's 65th birthday party had been sent out months ago, back when I was still the good daughter. Back when I was still paying for the venue deposit. It was being held at Giovanni's, a mid-range Italian banquet hall that Mom loved because it had gold-painted columns and waiters in tuxedos, a veneer of luxury that matched the facade of her life. I hadn't RSVP'd. After the explosion in the living room, I assumed I was uninvited. But 3 days before the event, I received a text from my Aunt Sarah, Mom's younger, far more sensible sister. Your mother is telling everyone you're going through a mental health crisis and might not make it. She's setting the stage, Em. If you don't show up, her version of the truth becomes the only version. That was the spark I needed. I wasn't going to let Mary rewrite history while I sat at home. I arrived at Giovanni's 20 minutes late. It was a calculated move. I wanted everyone to be seated. I wanted the drinks to have been poured. I wanted the tension to be simmering. I wore a dress I had bought for myself, a sharp, tailored navy sheath that made me look like exactly what I was, a successful professional. No more hoodies, no more rushing from work in my warehouse gear. I walked in with my head high, clutching a small, elegant clutch. Inside, that clutch was not lipstick or a compact, but a folded copy of the HELOC statement and the photo of Kyle's Tesla. As I entered the banquet room, the hum of conversation didn't stop, but it shifted. Heads turned. I saw my cousins nudging each other. I saw my Uncle Bob looking at me with a mix of pity and confusion. The narrative had already been planted. Poor Emily. She's having a breakdown. She's jealous of Kyle. Mom was at the head table, wearing a sequined gold dress that was a little too tight. She froze when she saw me. Her smile faltered, looking like a crack in a pour. Selling mask. Beside her, Dad looked down at his lasagna, refusing to meet my eyes. Kyle was there, of course, sitting at the right hand of the throne, laughing loudly at something a younger cousin said, a glass of red wine in his hand. I didn't go to the head table. I walked to a table near the back where Aunt Sarah was sitting. "Is this seat taken?" I asked softly. Sarah looked up, her eyes kind and sharp. "For you, always." She squeezed my hand as I sat down. "Brave girl," she whispered. "She's been working the room for an hour. Apparently, you cut them off because you're bipolar and off your meds." I felt a cold spike of rage, but I tamped it down. "Let her talk," I said. "I'm just here to listen." And talk she did. When the tiramisu was served, Mom stood up. She tapped her spoon against her glass. The room fell silent. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice trembling with practiced emotion. 65 years. It makes you reflect on what matters: family, sacrifice." She dabbed at a dry eye. "Gary and I have tried so hard to build a legacy of love, but sometimes children lose their way." She looked directly at me. The whole room followed her gaze. The spotlight was on me, harsh and unwanted. "We pray for those who are struggling with anger and jealousy," she continued, her voice gaining strength. "We pray that they find it in their hearts to remember who raised them, who loved them. It breaks a mother's heart when a child turns their back on family over petty greed." It was a masterclass in manipulation. She wasn't just defending herself, she was preemptively discrediting anything I might say. She was painting me as the villain before I had even opened my mouth. Kyle smirked. He raised his glass to her. "To the best mom in the world," he shouted. "To Mary," the room echoed. I stood up. I didn't shout. I didn't throw a drink. I just stood up, scraping my chair leg against the floor. The sound was jarring in the congratulatory atmosphere. "Emily, sit down," Dad hissed from the head table. "Don't make a scene." "I think a scene is exactly what Mom wants, Dad," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the room. "She just brought up my greed and my struggle in front of 40 people. I think I have a right of reply." "This isn't the time," Mom said, her eyes narrowing. "You're ruining my birthday." "You ruined our relationship when you stole my future to fund Kyle's toys," I said. I walked forward, toward the head table. The room was deathly silent now. "You talked about sacrifice, Mom. Let's talk about sacrifice. Let's talk about who has paid the mortgage on your house for the last 10 years. "She's lying," Kyle shouted, standing up. "She's delusional. This is what I was talking about." "Am I?" I reached into my clutch. I pulled out the papers. I didn't hand them to Mom. I handed them to Uncle Bob, Dad's older brother, the patriarch of the extended family. He was a retired accountant, a man who respected numbers above all else. "Uncle Bob," I said, "you know my handwriting. You know my bank accounts. Can you look at this? Can you tell the room whose name is on the recurring transfer for the mortgage from 2020 to last month?" Bob put on his reading glasses. He looked at the paper. He looked at me, then at Dad. "It's Emily's account," Bob said, his voice gruff. "Monthly transfers, $1,800. A murmur went through the room. "And while you're at it, Bob," I continued, "look at the next page, the document from the county clerk. The home equity line of credit taken out 18 months ago." Mom's face went white. "Emily, stop it. This is private family business." "You made it public when you called me greedy in your speech," I countered. "Read it, Bob." "Lien against the property," Bob read, $100,000. "And the next page," I said, pointing to the wire transfer. "Where did the money go?" "KDAV Global Ventures," Bob read. He looked up, his eyes hard as they landed on Kyle. "That's you, isn't it, son?" Kyle was sweating now. It was an investment, a seed round. "And the final page," I said. "The screenshot from your Instagram, Kyle. The one you posted the week after the money hit your account." I held up the photo of the Tesla, the one with the hashtag #NewWhip. "Did you invest in a car, Kyle?" I asked. "Is that the company asset?" The room erupted. The whispers turned into gasps and outraged murmurs. My family wasn't perfect, but they were working-class people who understood the value of $1. They understood theft. You took a loan against the house Emily was paying for? Aunt Sarah's voice cut through the noise like a knife. She stood up, knocking her chair over. Mary, tell me that isn't true. It's our house, Mary screamed, finally snapping. We can do what we want with it. Emily doesn't need the money, she's fine. Kyle needed help. He didn't need help, I said, my voice steady, though my heart was pounding. He needed a job. And instead of giving him that reality check, you gave him my inheritance. You gave him the equity I built. And you wrote me out of the will because I was resilient. I looked at my parents. They looked small. They looked exposed. The veneer of the happy, successful retirees was gone, replaced by the ugly truth of their financial abuse. I'm done, I said to the room. I'm not crazy, I'm not greedy, I'm just done being the bank. The mortgage is 2 months behind. The bank will be calling soon. I suggest you ask the entrepreneur to pay it. I turned to leave. Emily, wait, Dad called out. There was panic in his voice now, real panic. We can fix this, we can talk. I didn't look back. I walked out of the banquet hall, past the stunned waiters, out into the cool night air. I thought I would feel sad. I thought I would feel lonely. But as the doors swung shut behind me, muffling the chaos inside, I realized I felt something else entirely. I was free. The fallout was swift and brutal, much like the collapse of a house built on a foundation of rot. Without my payments, the house of cards didn't just wobble, it disintegrated. The bank didn't care about Mom's excuses or Kyle's projected revenue. They cared about the missed payments. Because the HELOC was also in default, the foreclosure process accelerated. I didn't have to do anything. I didn't have to sue them. I just had to stand back and let gravity take over. 3 months after the birthday party, 42 Oak Lane was listed as a pre-foreclosure sale. My parents were forced to downsize into a 2-bedroom rental apartment in a less desirable part of town. The lease required a cosigner. I declined. Uncle Bob declined. Aunt Sarah declined. They ended up having to pay 6 months of rent up front, depleting the last of Dad's meager $401k. And Kyle, the golden child, did exactly what parasites do when the host withers. He found a new host. When the money ran out and the Tesla was repossessed, Kyle didn't stay to help Mom and Dad pack boxes. He didn't get a job to help them with rent. He met a girl on a dating app, a girl with a steady job and her own apartment, and moved in with her 2 weeks later. He ghosted them. The son they had sacrificed everything for, the son they had destroyed their relationship with me to protect, stopped answering their calls the moment they had nothing left to give. I heard all of this through Aunt Sarah. Sarah had become my anchor. In the weeks following the party, she had reached out, not to mediate, but to apologize. We were sitting in my apartment one rainy Sunday afternoon, drinking tea. The silence between us was comfortable, unlike the strained silences I was used to with my parents. I always knew they favored him, Sarah said, staring into her mug. But I didn't know the extent of it, Emily. I didn't know you were paying the mortgage. I thought Gary had a better pension. He wanted everyone to think that, I said. Admitting I was paying for it would have hurt his pride. You shouldn't have had to carry that, she said. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with tears. I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner. I'm sorry I didn't step in. I reached across the table and took her hand. You're here now, Aunt Sarah. That's what matters. You know, she smiled, a sad, wistful smile. Your grandmother, my mom, she always said you were the one with the spine. She'd be proud of you. Not for being capable like Mary says, as if it's a chore, but for standing up for your own worth. That was the reconciliation I needed. Not with the people who broke me, but with the lineage that I came from. Knowing that someone in my family saw me, really saw me, healed a part of my heart that I didn't know was broken. What about them? Sarah asked. Mary calls me every day crying. She says they're drowning. I looked out the window at the rain, washing the city streets clean. I sent them a list of financial aid resources, I said. Food pantries, subsidized housing applications, job fairs for seniors. And money. No, I said firmly. No money. If I give them money, I'm just paying for their denial. They need to learn to live the life they can afford. It's the kindest thing I can do for them, really. Sarah squeezed my hand. You're a good woman, Emily, better than they deserve. The following week, I received a letter. It wasn't a text. It was a handwritten letter from Dad. Emily, the apartment is small. The walls are thin. I miss the garden. Kyle changed his number. We haven't heard from him in a month. I was looking at the old photos yesterday, the ones from your graduation. You looked so happy. I'm sorry I didn't protect that happiness. I'm sorry I let the fear of Kyle failing make me fail you. I know it's too late. I know the money is gone. But I wanted you to know that I know what we lost. We didn't just lose the house. We lost the only child who ever actually gave a damn about us. Love, Dad. I read Th. E letter twice. I didn't cry. I felt a deep, abiding sadness for him, a man who had woken up too late to save his life. I folded the letter and put it in a drawer. I didn't reply. Not yet. Maybe one day, when the wounds had turned to scars, I would meet him for coffee. But not today. Today, I had a life to live. I picked up my phone. I opened my banking app. Savings balance, $12,400. It wasn't a fortune, but it was growing. It was mine. Every cent of it was mine. I transferred $500 to a new sub-account I had named My Future Home. I closed the app, grabbed my keys, and walked out the door. The rain had stopped. The sun was breaking through the clouds, painting the wet pavement in shades of gold. It was a beautiful day to be capable.